Good morning, everyone. As she mentioned, my name is Anup Changaroth. So I suspect many of you don't really know who Arista is. You saw that little video, but that probably didn't quite register. In fact, quite often people mistake Arista for Arista Records, the people who manage music distribution and music artists. We're not quite that company. So I thought I would spend maybe just a couple of minutes to give you an introduction of who we are so that you have a better idea of who Arista is. Some of you might be a little bit surprised at who Arista is. So we've been in business for a couple of years now, for almost 15, 20 years now. But what's interesting is, and you see a graph on the left, this is a graph from Gartner. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Gartner, who does a lot of analysis work on the industry. And you might notice Arista right at the top of the leader quadrant of data center switching equipment. So some of you might be surprised, why is Arista right at the top of the leader quadrant of data center switching equipment? In fact, we are the leader. When you take a look at what's been happening in the data center market, all of the build-outs that you've heard about, we are actually a key vendor supplier to many of the hyperscalers that you are probably familiar with. When you think about Office 365, for example, for Microsoft, or when you think about TikTok, for example, all of that applications and services in the cloud are running on top of Arista equipment. And that's why you see us profiled very highly up there. In fact, you see the numbers from a Magic Quadrant perspective. So just to give you an example of who we are and the context of what I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so how does that relate to cybersecurity and priming for cybersecurity? Well, if you are building infrastructure, if you're building data center infrastructure in massive scale, cybersecurity has to be an instrumental part of how you build a network, right? And so when you look at data center infrastructure, really Arista has solutions. And again, this is I'm sure all of you are familiar with the context of the fact that the number of attack surfaces across any kind of enterprise is growing. And the reason it's growing is that most enterprises are going into a hybrid environment where they not only have their own IT infrastructure, but they're using cloud services, they're using applications in the cloud. And so the number of attack surfaces has grown exponentially. This diagram shows you a number of key facts that are universal across on a global basis. For example, 84% of companies today are a hybrid. They have remote workers, they have their own IT, they have cloud applications, cloud services, and in some cases, multiple cloud services, right? Another example is 125 plus distributed applications used by enterprises, right? So enterprises use a vast number of applications. They may be financial applications, engineering applications, design applications. Some of them are inbuilt in their IT systems, some of them are in the cloud. So there's a vast number of application points as entry vehicles for malicious attacks against your enterprise, right? Some additional examples, 75% of attacks are malware-free. What that means is that if you have a cybersecurity solution that is specifically looking for malware or specific viruses, for example, then you're going to miss a lot of the attacks that will happen in your networks, right? Increasingly, they look like normal traffic, but they actually inject attacks into your network through means that you may not be aware of, right? So the threat surfaces across networks is increasingly exponentially, and this is how we need to take care of it. Just building perimeter defenses in traditional approach with firewalls is not going to be enough. And really, that's the crux of what we're talking about when we talk about cyber defense in the network infrastructure. For you to be able to really understand and appreciate what's happening with AI from an infrastructure standpoint, I wanted to be able to show you the difference between what a traditional data center looks like and what an AI data center looks like so that you understand how network infrastructure is changing with AI. So on the left is a typical traditional AI, a non-AI data center. And the key aspect of the infrastructure that you're probably, or many of you are probably familiar with, is this leaf-spine architectural concept. You've got a switching infrastructure that's built with a leaf-spine architecture that allows you to connect a bunch of compute resources, storage resources across your data center, right? This is how it's been built for the last 15, 20 years. Standard, highly scalable, it can scale to millions of servers. This is how all of your Netflix and your AWS and all of those applications that you can think of is delivered off of infrastructure that looks like this, okay? AI changes things quite dramatically. This is what an AI data center looks like. The key difference is not only do you have what you see on your typical data center, and we call that the front end, but you also have a back-end network. The back-end network is designed to interconnect the GPUs that are used for the AI learning and inference processes, right? I'm sure all of you have heard of AI training and AI inference, right? The vast number of GPUs that are used for the AI training is built on an interconnect fabric built on the back end of a data center, right? And this is how, from Meta to Google to Anthropic to Tesla to a whole range of people who are building large-scale AI data centers, this is what the network infrastructure looks like at a fundamental level. Of course, there's other aspects. There's the management aspects. There's the observability aspects. All of that adds to this infrastructure, but the base foundational infrastructure looks like this, right? So when you think about cybersecurity and the relevance of cybersecurity, not only is it in the traditional sense of your data center, but it's now multiplied by a huge amount. In fact, more than doubled in terms of the threat surfaces that are involved in securing your infrastructure. Okay, so that's the basic context, and that's what we do. Arista builds these data centers in conjunction with people like NVIDIA, of course, or AMD, and so on. But this is what we do. This is our bread and butter in many cases across the hyperscalers, but increasingly across enterprise networks as well, as enterprise start to rebuild their data centers into a much more AI-centric approach. Okay, so in order to secure those infrastructures, to secure the network infrastructure, we work together with the industry, and one of the key industry players is obviously the federal government in the US, but also in the EU as well, in Europe as well. And this CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, is a federal government agency in the US that defines all of the key aspects that you need to take care of when you want to secure a network infrastructure. And so we've been working with them, and they specify, and they have a white paper that talks about what are the foundational requirements of a zero trust network. And I'm sure all of you have heard the term zero trust network, and I'll show you some additional details of what that looks like. But it's building that zero trust network, the foundational elements, the key principles are defined by the CISA and also by the EU in the NIS2 specifications, what they call the Preamble 89, right? So in other words, if you are building a network infrastructure, a data center, you can reference these documents to look at what are the key principles that you need to take into consideration when you want to build a secure infrastructure. Okay, so from Arista's perspective, 3 key principles to building. You can distill all of that information. It's a multi-page document from both CISA and the NIS2. You can distill it down to really 3 key principles that we see from our perspective. Number 1 is situational awareness, right? What we mean by situational awareness is that when you build that network infrastructure, you need observability. You need clear observability at multiple layers of the network, not just at the physical layer, but right up top to the application layer. Having concrete real-time observability of the network and being able to then take some actions based on what you have observed that's happening in real time in the network. So that situational awareness, applications, network elements, users, profiles, all of that situational awareness needs to be a key part of your infrastructure build. The second piece is multi-domain segmentation. And I'll explain this a little bit more detail later on. But in essence, the traditional approach of building networks is that once you have firewalled your network, everything inside of that firewall domain is free for everyone to talk to each other. Every network element, every user, every device can talk to each other freely. So there is a no trust environment. There's an open environment where everybody can talk to each other. In a zero trust environment, nobody can talk to each other unless it's been explicitly approved, right? So you're explicitly setting up the trust relationship between every element in the network inside your network, not just outside the network. So that's the multi-domain segmentation. I'll come back to that later on. And then, of course, the network detection and response, the NDR stuff, right? And I'm sure you've heard of the NDR stuff lots, and you'll hear more of it today, right? And again, being able to do the NDR capability, you actually have to have all three of these aspects before you can actually properly implement an NDR, sort of a solution. So how do we then, when you put those pieces together, you understand what's happening on the network infrastructure, and you look at the principles that are involved, how do we then at Arista go about building this for our customers? A couple of key ways. At the very underlying fabric of the solution is a zero trust, what we call a zero trust underlay. And that's underpinned by not just physical network assets, but also an operating system that is secure, that is stable and reliable. And so we have a bunch of solutions at Arista, which I won't go into the details, that builds on as the underlay of a secure network architecture. On top of that, obviously, a network is built on multiple network elements. Being able to abstract that real-time information from the network element into what we call a network data lake, right? So that you have full visibility of the entire network on an end-to-end basis in real time, what's going on with the network, right? In terms of protocols, in terms of applications, in terms of network flow, right? Data flow, and so on. So having that network data lake as the next foundation that abstracts the information from the network elements up to the observability layer. And then on top of that, a whole bunch of key aspects from network access control to observability, to segmentation, to threat detection and confidentiality. These are key pillars that are built on top of that, bolted on top of that foundation that helps you to build an infrastructure that is secure. Now, we recognize at Arista, that we can't be the best at everything, right? So we have to have a network infrastructure that has open access, secure open access to work with partners. Partners, many of whom are best-of-breed solutions across the industry. So having those open API access into those partners that allows those partners to securely act on the network in delivering services in a secure fashion. And that's part and parcel of what you need to think about when you're building an infrastructure that is secure. Okay. So just to dive into one of the examples of the segmentation, for example, I talked about multi-domain segmentation. Sometimes you will hear the term micro-segmentation or macro-segmentation. In essence, what you see here in this diagram on the left is a traditional approach where once you've had a firewall placed in your network across your borders of the network, then inside your network, everyone trusts everyone, right? And so you see a lot of white spaces where any element is able to talk to any other element, whether that's an IoT device or a server or an end user's laptop. They're all able to communicate with each other quite freely, right? In a zero trust environment, it's quite different. What you see on the right is a zero trust environment where you can segment your network at a micro level. So you are able to identify specific users or specific flows or specific servers or specific applications and tie that to specific individuals or specific elements in a relationship of trust which is blocked from everyone else. So if an IoT device has a malware or a threat that it comes in, it doesn't infect the rest of the network. It only infects potentially those secure relationships that it actually has with, right? So being able to securely define those relationships is a key part of of increasing network infrastructure deployment. So that kind of micro-segmentation. And then NDR, of course, again, I won't dive into too much details about NDR, but essentially the NDR capability is built on a foundation of analyzing the network data from layer 2 all the way to layer 7, meaning from the physical transport layer right up to the application layer, being able to recognize protocols. We recognize, for example, the Arista NDR recognizes over 3,000 different protocols. So that's different applications, different technology protocols that are used in the network. And also increasingly, I'm sure most of you are aware that network traffic is encrypted, right? A large number of network traffic is encrypted. So being able to use AI tools to understand the fingerprints, even though if you can't analyze what's been encrypted, you can't see the actual payload, but you can still recognize fingerprint of threats that are coming across the network. And we have AI tools that allow us to recognize those fingerprints across encrypted traffic. And this has become an increasing problem across most networks, where a lot of applications are delivering on an end-to-end basis that are encrypted. So again, a major challenge for security professionals. Okay, so kind of to wrap it up, I'm not going to go into all of these texts, but essentially I wanted to make sure that you understood that in networks today, building infrastructure is not just a traditional approach. When you think about AI, it gets a lot more complicated. There's a lot more network elements that are involved. The infrastructure gets very large in many cases. The threat surfaces across these networks are multiplying at multiple layers of the network. And so being able to secure it from a cybersecurity standpoint becomes an increasing problem across most customers who are trying to build networks. And so you really need the right kind of tools, the right kind of network solutions that allows you to segment, allows you to detect and observe what's going on in the network in real time, and so be able to secure it. Okay? So with that, I'd like to wrap up, and thank you very much.